So a little bit about myself. Like Connie said, I'm a dad, and so I didn't have a PowerPoint, but after seeing and or I think it was Andrew show a picture of his family, I wanted to show a picture of my son because I'm really proud of him as well. So let me share my screen for a second here. Um, okay, so this is Eli, and we just did a little photo shoot, and he's 2, and yeah, developmentally, it is so different. I mean, it was so different parenting him as a 6-month-old and as an 18-month-old, and so I really appreciate those comments about different stages and different challenges because it's very, very true. And it is hard too, as well. I appreciate the comments about. I didn't know about the depression rates, but I did know that male postpartum depression is a thing. But I'm like, yeah, it's hard. It's isolating. It's hard to stay in touch with friends and social community. So I've really appreciated everyone's comments so far. So what I'm going to talk about and share about a bit is how dads can create rites of passage for their sons. So I'm really passionate about helping boys and young men. So I know this is about fathers, but specifically, the reason that I'm passionate about this is because when I started working as a counselor, I just saw how talk therapy is not the greatest. It wasn't as effective for boys, it seemed, as for girls. And so I started reading, and I just started to realize about how there is this boy crisis going on. There is these high rates of suicide. And I started to see, how come I didn't notice before? Most of the homeless people I see are men. And I started researching, and 80% of opioid deaths are men, but we're not having a conversation about what is it about being a man, or what is it about being a boy that growing up in our society that leads to these outcomes. And so that's how I became passionate about this, and that's how I got into it. And so today I'm going to be sharing about rites of passage, which I think is a really important thing that dads can do for their sons, is create rites of passage for them to help them transition from being a boy to being a man. And so you might be wondering, what is a rite of passage? Well, this sociologist named Arnold van Gennep, he traveled around the world and studied rites of passage in cultures. A lot of the cultures were hunter-gatherer cultures where there are more prevalent rites of passage. And he defines it as a rite of passage is any life cycle ritual that marks a person or a group's transition from one social state to another. So, going from a boy to a man is from one state to another. It could be going from not being a parent to being a parent, not married to married. And so we still have some of these rites of passage in our culture, wedding ceremonies, high school graduation is one. Um, but we've lost a lot of the rites of passage that we used to have in marking boys' transition from being a boy to being a man. And I think that this is a big contributing factor to the boy crisis, is that we have a lot of young men walking around who don't even know what a man is, let alone if they are one, and they don't have the tools to do that themselves. And I think that that's normal because throughout history, it's always been men that have helped boys make that transition. And it's always been women that have helped girls make the transition from girlhood to womanhood. And so, yeah, I'm really passionate about this. And I hope that some of the things I talk about can help you in creating these rites of passage for your son, or for maybe a nephew or boys in your life. And so in the history of rites of passage, in hunter-gatherer societies, it's often been, going away into the wilderness and maybe facing a trial, or, circumcision or something like this, something difficult, and then coming back to the community and being presented as, a man now, and taking on the roles and responsibilities. And then in agrarian society, apprenticing, boys at a young age would apprentice under maybe their dad or maybe a person in the community to learn a trade. And this in itself was an informal rite of passage. But for boys, again, it's missing in that crucial window of 13 to 14, when they're going through puberty and they're starting to become stronger and they're starting to engage in these risky behaviors, is that there's nothing really for them. We have high school graduation, but that comes much later, not in the critical window. And if the boy's not good in school, that's not going to be affirming for him, because he's going to say, well, I'm not smart, quote unquote, meaning he's not book smart. So whether or not we're creating these rites of passage for boys, they are going through them. So boys will create their own rites of passage to help prove that they are a man. And so the reason is because for men, being a man is a lot more socially prescribed than it is for a woman to be a woman. So for women, once they go through the process of getting their period, that's almost like a rite of passage in itself, in that it's, you know, confusing and challenging, and they can support each other and talk about it. Um, and once they're, you know, biologically mature as an adult woman, we kind of, we don't really question whether they are a woman anymore. We don't say like, oh, you're not a woman. Um, you know, you might, but for a man, you know, we might say you're not acting like a man, or be a man, right? What does that mean if you're a 25-year-old and say be a man, right? And so boys know that being a man isn't just about maturing biologically, but it's about doing something, or in you know, these 5 different metaphors, right? They're all performative metaphors. It's all about what the man's doing, right? Not about who he is, or biologically what he's made up of. And so, in their quest to become men, teenage boys, especially around that age, engage in risky behaviors. And these are like their own rites of passage that they create. And sometimes they can get them into trouble, and sometimes they can get them into a whole host of things. And I did these things as well. There's this African proverb that says that if we don't initiate our sons, they will burn down the village just to feel the heat. And so there's a sense that it's not that we need to create rites of passage, it's that they are being done by boys. They are creating them themselves, and they are acting them out in their circles and in our communities. Okay, so I wrote a blog post on this, and so in case you're wanting to have the information, I'll just post it in the chat so that you can access it later. It's basically, I did it to kind of help summarize my thoughts, but also that in case you wanted to look back and stuff like that. But a lot of the stuff that I got from this talk, I got from the book called The Purpose of Boys by Michael Gurian. And he's a therapist and educator in the States who has written extensively on the boy crisis and on what boys need. And so I'm kind of doing a little bit of a condensing of, he created a rites of passage for boys, a program that's a year long and quite in depth, but I kind of condensed down some of the elements that he talks about into 5 things that I think are parts of a rite of passage. So the first thing is a challenge, so doing something hard. The second is the mentors that guide the boys along the challenge. The third thing is the badge, which is a token or physical item, which is a symbol of their success. The third thing is a speech. So that is where the boy talks about his experiences and on what he's learned and how he's grown. And then the third thing is the blessing or the naming, where the mentors speak to who the boy is, what he's gone through, and where they see him going as a man. And so you can see some of these elements in different activities that kids do. So a big one is sports. So I grew up playing football, and you can see all these elements in sports. So the challenge, right? Practicing, winning games, the mentors, coaches, and people coming alongside. The badge, you know, you might get awards or medals, or even injuries can be like badges to boys, right? They can be proud of their bruises and their scars because it shows that they strived hard. And the speech might be, you know, boys giving each other a pep talk before or during the game. And the blessing is the coaches, you know, calling up really good coaches. They will talk to and speak to the strengths of each player, even the ones who are not on the field, but maybe the practice squad, and highlighting those. And so we can see these elements in different things in a child's life. So, you know, if you're not actively creating them, they might be going through them, but I think the more opportunities that boys have to have a structured rites of passage towards being a man, the less likely they'll be to either engage in risky behaviors, or just wonder about their question and purpose about what it does mean to be a man. All right, so I've said the critical window is 13 to 14. I don't like, you could do it before, but I think after is probably more ideal. But there's even adult men who, there's a thing called the Mankind Project, which basically is a rite of passage weekend. And so I don't think it's ever too late. You know, if a man has never been affirmed by other men and never gone through a process like this, he might feel he still needs it even into his 30s and later. So, but if you're a parent, the kind of 13 to 14 is a critical window for boys. Okay, so how you can create this for your own son. So in the past, rites of passage were kind of blanket for all the boys, but you can kind of tailor this to the needs of your son to make it the most meaningful and impactful for him. So the first thing is the challenge. So talk with your son about something that he wants to do. It could be related to his interests. You know, if some kids are really into computers and gaming, and maybe he wants to build a computer. A lot of the boys I work with want to do that, or design a video game. You know, it could be more traditional weekend in the wilderness kind of thing, where he's in charge of doing some of the responsibilities. But try to find something that aligns with what he likes, because he'll be more engaged. And it also has to be something where he might not succeed. So there has to be an opportunity for potential failure for it to be meaningful. Okay, so the second thing is the mentors. So a dad could be a mentor, but I think it's really important to have other mentors, other male mentors, maybe uncles or people from the community. The more the better, who can come alongside him in the task. But it's really important that they don't do the task for him, because then the blessing won't be meaningful because he didn't actually do any work. So they can support and offer guidance and offer emotional support, but they shouldn't do the thing for him. Even if he fails, it'll still be a learning experience for him, and he'll have the pride of knowing that he did it on his own. So the third thing is the badge. So, you know, you can prepare some physical token or thing to give the boy after the task has been completed. And if this is something that has meaning or significance to the family or to men in the family, it can be even more powerful. If it may be something that his dad or passed down from a grandfather, or if it has meaning, then that connects the boy in his mind to past generations of men, and is really something that he can physically hold and even maybe wear, that reminds him of this experience and what it meant to him. And then fourthly, we have the speech. So after the boy has done the task, you know, arrange an evening, or maybe there's people, the mentors, other people in the boy's life, to have dinner, and where he can talk about what he went through. And give him a couple weeks to prepare these words and speak about the experience, what it meant to him, what the mentors meant to him, what he learned about himself, and also who he wants to become. And then finally, the blessing and the naming. So each of the mentors can prepare a short speech that acknowledges the challenges the boy has faced, highlighting his strengths and positive attributes, and also how he has been dealing with overcoming his weaknesses, and affirming their vision for his life and his future. Okay, so another example of rites of passage that I do with my clients as a counselor is when we do our closing session for therapy. So rites of you know, you can use this process for something that maybe the boy has already done. And so, for example, when we're closing therapy and ending, we want to end on a good note. And using the 5 kind of elements, you can kind of see how this rite of passage has those elements. So the challenge for the child has been going through their mental health challenges and has been doing the work of therapy, which is extremely hard and difficult work to do. You have to self-reflect. You have to face your fears. You have to change your behaviors. The mentor is obviously the counselor, and maybe other people in their life who they share their mental health struggles with. And then the badge. So the badge is something, it's not like a typical badge, but usually I invite them to create something with me at the end. So I've created songs, I've created artwork with them, I've created, sometimes we create a vision board, but something that they can take away with them that reminds them of this experience. And then the speech. So at some point I usually ask them, you know, what are the things that you've learned through counseling? What have you learned about yourself? What are the skills you've learned? And what do you see for yourself going forward? And then finally, for the blessing, I typically write a closing letter where I outline, you know, where they were at the beginning of counseling, which is usually a very dark place. I talk about the struggles that they faced, how they overcome them, how they went through them. And then I talk about where they are now, and I acknowledge, you know, they might not be 100% where they want to be. but that I acknowledge that they have the strength and they have the skills to go forward beyond the relationship. Because a lot of times they worry, well, if I don't have counseling or don't have something, what if this happens or what if that? So I affirm their strength and their competence to do that. And so I guess I just say this to encourage you to think outside the box with rites of passage. It doesn't have to be like so cut and dried. If your kid's going through something or if they've gone through something, you can use that as a way of marking the transition. Because remember, rites of passage is just marking a transition from one social state to another. So if they've gone from being a boy to a man, or they've gone from doing counseling to now they're not doing counseling, or if they've gone from going through depression to now they're coming out the other side, or maybe they're learning things, you can mark that. And I think that's the part that is really powerful about it, is that it's they feel really seen, and they feel a new sense of, oh, this is who I am, this is what I've done, and this is the people around me that have witnessed it.